The letter I found in my parents' house uncovered a secret the town tried to bury. I never thought of myself as sentimental. Old things, yellowed photographs, boxes of childhood drawings, a cracked watch, always felt like clutter, relics of a life I'd left behind. But that evening I stood in my parents' hallway, the house smelling of cedar and soap, and something pulled me toward the pantry where an old wardrobe leaned. It was a simple mission: dust off boxes, make space for bags to take to the thrift store. Instead, under a moth-eaten sweater, my fingers brushed paper. Tucked into the seam of the blanket was an envelope with my name written in a hand I hadn't seen in years. My chest tightened. The loop of the letters, the little flourish on the Y. It was my Uncle Alexander's handwriting. He had vanished when I was 10. One day, he was at the table, laughing with us. The next he was gone, and the family stopped speaking his name as though silence might stitch the wound closed. We had rumors and a faded photograph, but no explanation. Finding his handwriting felt like opening a door that had been waiting. The envelope had no stamp or return address. Its edge was singed, as if it had been near a flame and then stashed. I slid my thumb under the flap and unfolded the single sheet. The first lines reached into me like cold fingers. If you are reading this, then the thing I feared most has come. It began. Forgive the secrecy. Forgive the fear. I cannot trust anyone. Not the neighbors. Not the men who smiled and asked too many questions. Not those who called themselves friends. My fingers trembled. The paper smelled faintly of smoke. He wrote in shorter sentences after that, each like a step down a dark staircase. Warnings about people who watch from the town's edges. References to a promise made long before my birth. A careful insistence that I should not return to the place where I learned to ride a bike. Then a line that stopped my breath. They will come back when you forget it ever happened. I read the paragraph 3 times, tasting the urgency in his words. Wind rose outside the kitchen window and rattled the glass, as if to prove nights were different. The past felt alive. I realized that whatever had begun in my childhood had never truly ended. I folded the letter back along its creases and pressed it to the counter like a fragile relic that might crumble if I handled it wrong. My hands still smelled faintly of cedar from the wardrobe. The house seemed too quiet, as if the walls were listening. I read on. Alexander's handwriting grew shakier in the middle of the page, as though the pen had quivered with each memory. He wrote about a summer when the town felt smaller, the kind of summer you remember by the scrape of gravel under bare feet and the lullaby of crickets. He had been poking around the old Miller place on the ridge. He said, the place kids dared each other to go, but never stayed long. Behind the Miller barn, under a loose board, he'd found something wrapped in oilcloth, a small tin box stamped with a symbol I knew from family stories, a crooked hourglass encircled by a ring of dots. He described the tin without naming it. Do not search for it unless you are ready, he wrote. It is not treasure. It is a ledger of debts in ways the law cannot hold. Those who once owed it their silence made bargains with it. It remembers. The memory tugged at me like a thread through wool. I remembered being 10 and daring my uncle to jump the creek from the old stone bridge. I remembered his laugh, the way he waved me back from the lip when I scrambled too close to the water. I never thought about what he might have been fleeing from. At the time, terror in a grown man's face seemed like a story adults told children to make the world bigger. Alexander's letter shifted tone. He apologized for keeping secrets from his family, but insisted he had chosen secrecy to keep us safe. If you want to know more, he wrote, start with the willow by the river, where the bark splits like an open hand. There's a knot there, beneath it, a name carved faintly. If that name is yours, then they already know more than I feared. My throat tightened. The willow by the river. I hadn't thought of that tree in years. I could see it as a film still, long branches brushing the water, the place where I'd fallen in once and been pulled out laughing and coughing by hands that smelled of soap and lemon. Who would carve my name there as a child? Who would be watching now? The letter ended without telling me what to do next. Instead, it left an address, scrawled in the margin in a hurried hand, a post office box in the next county, and a single instruction. If you decide to follow this, go at dusk. Trust no light but the river's own. Outside, the light was already thinning. My phone lay on the table, face down, as if even it should not interrupt. I felt the old itch, half curiosity, half dread, rise like a tide. The past, it seemed, had left a map, and every map comes with a trail. I told myself I would wait until dusk. It sounded like the safest thing to do. Darkness, after all, belonged to the river and the willow, not to a man rifling through someone else's secrets. Yet daylight has a way of making danger feel distant, almost manageable. Busy hours are honest hours. Phones ring, coffee cools, and the world keeps predictable rhythm. I used those hours to prepare. First, I dug through the attic where boxes of my childhood lived in a humidity-sweet hush. Old toys, school ribbons, a shoebox of photographs tied with string. Beneath them, wrapped in a tea towel, was a small leather notebook. My uncle's initials were stamped faintly on the cover. I should have felt triumphant. Another clue, but opening it felt less like progress than peeling a scab. Inside were lists and sketches. The crooked hourglass symbol again and again, arrows pointing to the Miller Ridge, names crossed out, a single line repeated until ink bled through the page. They remember everything. A pressed piece of something fell into my palm, tiny and brittle, the corner of a newspaper clipping. A headline, "Local Fire Destroys Outbuilding. Mystery Remains." The date was the summer before my 10th birthday. I thought of the tin box without naming it aloud. Alexander's letter had called it a ledger of debts. The notebook suggested it was more than superstition. He had been cataloging names, dates, places, as if trying to map an argument between the town's quieter faces and something older. On impulse, I called Mara, the only friend from back then who still lived here. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice, folded with caution, made me feel small and foolish and dangerously adult at once. "Don't go poking around that old place," she said bluntly. "You remember how folks lock their doors when someone different arrives? People don't like the past dug up." "Who told you?" I asked. Her hesitation was a thin sound. "No one. Just instincts. Also, some folks have been talking about your uncle again. Old men at O'Malley's swear they saw him arguing with a man named Hargreaves months before he vanished." Hargreaves. The name fell like a stone. My family had always said he owned half the town in polite whispers, donations at the fairs, photographs with the mayor. If Alexander had tangled with him, the stakes were no longer whispered family shame, but something that smelled of money and power. I thanked Mara and hung up. The attic felt colder, the notebook suddenly heavier. I had a choice. Follow the river's dark invitation like the letter instructed, or begin at the edges. Ask questions, poke at the town's polite surface, and risk calling attention. Before I could decide, my phone buzzed. An anonymous message blinked on the screen. "Stop. Come no closer." No number. No punctuation beyond the word. The silence after a hummed. For the first time since I'd unfolded that letter, fear was not a literary device. It was a presence in the room, patient and waiting. Dusk was still hours away. The river would not mind if I arrived late, but someone watching clearly did. Dusk pulled like a curtain across the town, softening edges until the street lamps looked like distant stars. I drove with the letter folded in my pocket, its paper crinkling against the coin in my jeans like a small, impatient thing. The river road smelled of wet earth and cut grass, the kind of smell that slides under your skin and keeps you remembering. Every road sign felt indecently familiar, as if I'd been living inside a photograph all my life and only now noticed the frame. The willow waited where it always had, branches sweeping the surface in slow, ceremonial gestures. In daylight, it had been my refuge, a place for stolen cigarettes and shy confessions. At night, it was ritual and rumor, the kind of tree that looks patient enough to hold secret. I parked a little way off and walked, because cars make noise and noise raises questions I didn't want asked. The knot Alexander mentioned was easy to find when you were looking for it. A healed split in the trunk where some child had once tried to hide a coin or commit a promise to wood. I ran my fingers over the faded gouge and felt, under the lichen, the faint ridges of letters. My name. I traced them, and each stroke felt like a small betrayal and a small blessing both. Someone had carved me into the town, and someone had been thinking of me in secret. There was a scrap of cloth caught on a low branch, the blue of it dulled by river air. Tied to it was a tag. Not a label, but a rectangle of thin, yellowed paper with a single word in my uncle's hurried hand. Leave. My heart argued with the letter. Leave because the danger was real. Stay because answers had a way of fleeing unless someone chased them down. I listened. The river moved in its habitual way, indifferent and tireless. From the trees on the far bank came the sound of a dog barking somewhere deep in town. When nothing else came, I stepped closer to the water, the cool of the grass seeping through my shoes. Something shifted in the underbrush. A small sound, almost the sound of breath. A figure detached itself from the shadows. Not a neighbor's silhouette, but someone wrapped in gray. The kind of coat people choose when they want to be remembered as ordinary. "You're late," the figure said, and the voice folded into the willow's rustle like another leaf. "Who are you?" I asked before I could measure the risk. My voice sounded thinner than I felt. "Someone who tried to keep a promise," was the reply. "Someone who tried to undo what was done. Alexander trusted me once. Relief and suspicion swirled together. Then why didn't he tell his family? The figure's laugh was a dry sound. He thought silence would suffocate it. Silence only lets it breathe in the dark. They moved closer, and I could see, in the dim, a face I almost recognized. Mara's father, perhaps, or a man I'd only seen at town meetings. He held something in his hand. A small metallic glint caught the last thin light. It could have been a coin, a key, or the edge of the tin box Alexander had written about. He did not show it. You weren't meant to find his letter, he said. But now that you have a choice. Walk away and forget, or come with me and see how deep this ledger runs. Either way, people are watching. Behind him, between two branches, a second shadow moved. Not a person, but the suggestion of many eyes, like lanterns blinked and then went out. The river didn't answer. I felt a decision make itself in the pit of my stomach, as old and bone-deep as hunger. Leave and live with the question forever, or follow a man into a dark I could not yet name. I chose the dark. It felt like the only honest thing to do. Leaving would have been another small death. The death of curiosity, of a chance to understand the man whose handwriting had haunted my life for years. The figure in gray watched me fold the letter and slip it into my pocket. He moved without hurry, as if the night knew him, as if the town had been waiting for his footsteps for a long time. We walked along the riverbank under a shallow moon. The sound of water and our boots filled the silence between us. He led me to a boathouse I half remembered from childhood trips, a low, sagging building with a paint-peeled door and a crooked nameplate. The smell inside was of oil, old rope, and something metallic like coins left in rain. He clicked a flashlight on only once, then off, as if shunning all but what we could hold in our hands. Alexander came here often, he said. Not for boats, for the ledger, for the tin. His voice had the intimacy of someone telling a secret to a church pew. He pointed to a workbench cluttered with tools. Under a loose board, he probed with a screwdriver until a hollow thunk answered. He lifted a small, rusted tin and set it on the bench between us. It was smaller than I had imagined, the crooked hourglass stamped on the lid like an accusation. When he opened it, the lamp in his palm threw light over folded slips of paper, a threadbare ribbon, and a key no bigger than my thumb. The papers were not ledgers in the accounting sense, not neat columns of debt, but short names and dates, single grievances written in different hands, some with initials, some with nicknames only locals would recognize. These are promises, he murmured. Not all of them signed willingly. Some were extorted with favors, threats, things people don't admit to in daylight. Alexander thought if you found them, you could unmake what was made. I picked up a slip and read a name I half knew from school rosters. Beside it, a date. Beside the date, a single word paid. My throat constricted. The ledger did not just keep track, it sealed things. It made them stick. Why keep it? I asked. Why not destroy it? Because destroying it doesn't erase what was done, he said. And because whoever owns the ledger will notice its absence. Alexander tried once. He burned a page. The next week someone set his shed on fire. The room seemed to tilt. I picture my uncle losing his notebooks, the singed edges, the way he hid a letter from his family. The figure in gray put the tin back and then, with care, handed me the small key. This opens the Miller Ridge locker, he said. That's where the ledger's originals were kept. If you want to stop it, you have to see everything. But know this, once you open it, there will be no pretending you didn't. A sound at the door, a soft, measured knock, made both our heads turn. The knock was deliberate, the kind used by those who knew how to make their presence an instrument. Outside, the night held its breath. The knock came again, harder this time, a percussion that made the old boathouse feel like a drum. The man in gray froze, eyes on the seam where the floor met the door. For a second, everything in me went still with him. The river outside, the light bulb's thin halo, even the dust motes seemed to be listening. Don't open it, he whispered. But the second knock carried a voice I recognized before I saw the face. Quick, breathless Mara's. Relief folded through me like warm rain. I moved to the door and cracked it just enough to see her silhouette. Wet hair stuck to her forehead, shoes muddied, eyes wide in a way that belonged to someone who'd been running from more than rain. "I couldn't keep away," she said. Her words tumbled out fast. "They followed me from the market. I lost them at the crossroads. She looked past me into the dim. "I had to come. I found something. I thought." She stopped, focusing on the tin on the bench. The man in gray let out a slow breath. "You're late," he said, softer than before, but the caution in his tone was sharpened now by alarm. He stepped back so Mara could slip inside. The door closed with a decisive click that seemed to seal the night with us. Mara's hands trembled as she reached for the ledger slips. She flattened one on the bench and squinted. "Where did Alexander get this?" she asked. "This isn't just blackmail. Look." She pointed to a smudge of ink on the paper, a tiny stamped symbol, the crooked hourglass, but beneath it, faint as a ghost's footprint, a company name. Hargreaves Holdings, I read, the letters rearranging themselves into a history I hadn't wanted. Hargreaves. Every covert threat suddenly took shape. Contracts, land deals, favors traded for silence. The ledger wasn't only a book of private bargains. It was an accounting of power. Mara swallowed. My father kept one of Hargreaves's letters, a donation slip for that summer festival. When I matched the handwriting the other night, I found Hargreaves' hand on more than one of these. They tied names to favors. "Look here." She tapped a name that made my vision blur. My father's initials beside a date 2 months before the fire at the Miller Outbuilding. My stomach dropped. The personal blurred with the political. If my father had been on these lists, if Alexander had tried to expose it, then the ledger wasn't something distant from me. It had always brushed my life, like a sleeve against my coat in a crowded room. A distant rumble began. Headlights. Not one car this time, multiple, their beams washing the trees in white. The man in gray cursed under his breath. "They came early," he said. "Too early." We moved toward the bench, gathering the slips, stuffing the tin into a canvas bag as if trying to smother its memory. The river's hush outside sharpened into a metallic edge as the vehicles slowed near the boathouse. Shadows pooled at the windows. I could hear boots on the gravel, a slow, deliberate march. A voice spoke from the doorway before I saw the face. It was a voice we all learned to fear, polite as a handshake, sharp as a blade. "Evening," it called. "Thought we'd save you the trouble of wandering, didn't we?" Alexander left quite a mess. We stood frozen, the ledger between us like a foreign country. Mara's fingers had found mine for a second, a small, fierce anchor. The man in gray moved to the door. For a heartbeat, I wanted to run, to fold up the pages and burn them, to fold us both into the river's dark and lose everything. But whatever fear I felt was threaded through with something else. The hunger to know, to face the ledger's truth. The door swung open. Light spilled in. The silhouette in the threshold was larger than the man in the stories, and his presence filled the room like a claim. He stepped in without removing his hat. "Mr. Hargreaves," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Hargreaves stepped in like a man who owned more than buildings. He owned a right to call the world orderly. His suit had the kind of cut you only saw in photographs of men who never minded other people's discomfort. He set his hat on the bench, as if placing a crown. The light from the doorway painted him in sharp relief. His smile was broad, practiced. My stomach turned. "Good evening," he said, as if he were greeting neighbors, not trespassers. "I suppose this is where secrets come to die." Mara's grip on my hand tightened. The man in gray, who I now knew as Elias, moved between us and the doorway, a slow blockade. He kept his voice low but steady. "You don't have to do this, Mr. Hargreaves." Hargreaves chuckled softly. "My dear Elias, I've never done anything that couldn't be undone with a conversation and the right incentive." He flicked his gaze to the tin and the canvas bag. "Hand them over, and perhaps we'll all avoid unpleasantness." Unpleasantness. Mara's laugh was a sharp thing. "Is that what you call arson? Threats?" The man who wrote that letter disappeared. "You call that conversation?" Hargreaves's eyes darkened the slightest fraction. "Regret is messy, child. We prefer tidy accounts." Alexander made a choice. He crossed a line that protects some very ordinary livelihoods. He used the word ordinary like a weapon. You think exposing names will free anyone? It will only come back as ruin. For you. For your families. My father's initials flickered in my head like a flame. I thought of the years of small kindnesses and the quiet silence at the dinner table when that night was mentioned in someone else's voice. Hargreaves stepped closer. The room shrank around him. "Tell me, why did Alexander hide his letter?" he asked, voice soft. "Was it cowardice? Or was it mercy?" Before I could answer, Elias scooped the tin up and shielded it with his body. "He's wrong," Elias said. "Alexander tried to fix it. He thought if someone else saw the ledger, they could undo what was done." Hargreaves's smile returned. "And now you think you can finish what he started?" He raised a hand lightly. "I'll make you an offer, since you insist on heroics. Bring me every scrap of what you found. Let's examine it. If there's evidence of crimes, there are proper channels, courts. Hand it to me, and I will see it goes to the right hands." "Those right hands are yours," Mara spat. "We've seen how right you've made things." There was a pause long enough for the river to mark time. In that pause, I thought of the post office box Alexander had left, the pencil-scratched address, the warning to go at dusk. I thought of the knot in the willow and the tag that said leave. Hargreaves was offering a leash disguised as help. "Either way," he said, lowering his voice until it was almost intimate, "you will know when you are in over your heads. Walk away now, and I will let you keep your lives. Resist, and you'll find that some debts are collected in ways the law cannot see." He turned as if dismissing us, and one of his men, the kind with a face as blank as a ledger entry, pocketed the tin's canvas bag as though he were reclaiming lost property. For a breath, the room tasted like coal and iron. Elias grabbed the man's wrist as the door closed. "You think this ends with threats?" he hissed. "It never ends with threats." Hargreaves paused on the threshold. "Consider the past a closed account," he said, and left us with the echo of his shoes on the gravel. Outside, a car started and rolled away down the road, swallowing its headlights. When the door shut, the three of us stood in the strained quiet between choices. The ledger was diminished, but not gone. A key and a few slips still lay scattered on the bench. My hand found one and smoothed the crease. The town suddenly felt smaller and more like an animal with teeth. "We don't have time to be careful," Mara said finally.